You see this all the time, even with the concept of freedom of speech. This is an ideological tool because Muslims don't disagree with freedom of speech. I mean, to claim such a thing, stop talking. Yeah? But we say that freedom of speech doesn't really exist in its absolute form. Because freedom of speech is always negated by some other principles. For example, in the West, you have things like libel laws. You have product defamation laws. You have hate speech laws. So you have restrictions to speech. Even in Islam, Allah Azza wa Jalla says you can't swear. Allah doesn't like, He says in the Quran, Allah doesn't like profanity and the utterance of evil speech in society. So there are restrictions even within the Sharia. So the point is, Muslims are a little bit more profound and practical. We say, look, instead of talking about freedom of speech, let's create a more coherent definition. Because the most coherent definition is what? That you can express yourself in the context of law and values. Because the society is not necessarily going to say things that's against its own values. So you're going to express yourself in the context of law and values. So the discussion should be not, do we believe in freedom of speech? But the discussion should be, what law and what values? But that never happens. Why does that never happen? Because they have an ideological perspective. Freedom of speech is there because they want to insult. I have every right to draw cartoons about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and even Isa alayhi salam. Generally speaking, they still want the right to really belittle religion in a non-nuanced way, in a very shallow way, so they could keep the secular ideological narrative that religion, keep it at home. It has no say in the intellectual public sphere. Freedom to insult goes against the very objectives of freedom of speech, which is truth, accountability, and progress. So don't listen to these liberals, these neoliberals who say, no, it has to be free because it has to be free. I mean, why? Why? There are objectives. You're not going to just say things for no reason. And especially when it comes to civilization discourse. If you want to know another civilization, drawing cartoons is uncivilized. And that should be our reaction. We should feel sorry and say, this is an uncivilized expression. You really want to know, we live in this society, this global village, you want to know who we are? Then talk to us. Discuss. When was the last time you sat with a committee of ulama and had a discussion about our ideological viewpoint on what we can offer on the political table and solve issues to do with global poverty? When did you inform us? When have you discussed these issues with us? But instead, again, because ideologies want to protect themselves, they use things like whether it's education or other institutions and ideas like freedom of speech in a very skewed way to focus on the insult and ridicule religion, especially Islam. And let me tell you why this is true. In France, there was a famous cartoonist, and he used to write as well, and he wrote in a famous French magazine, lambasting, taking the mick, if you like, out of Sarkozy's son, because apparently his son married just for money. He was sacked. It wasn't published. So there's no freedom of speech for political sensitivities. You see? Do you see the hypocrisy and the dichotomy here? Why not? We had other aspects. Some newspapers, they did some cartoons on the Jewish tradition, on the Christian tradition, said, no, this is going to offend people. Where was the freedom of speech there?